So we go on to our next speaker, Dr. Naren Shetty, who heads the Department of Cataract and Refractive Services at and also is the Vice Chairman of Naren Nethralaya Group. And his topic is going to be cracking the leathery posterior plate. So on to you, Dr. Naren.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Once again, I would like to thank for this opportunity from Dr. Chaitra ma'am and Ramoti sir. Today, I'm going to talk about pearls in cracking a leathery posterior pole or a plate. Now, before we do that, we really need to understand an opponent. What is really happening in a hard cataract or a black cataract or brown cataract? Now, you see the hardest part of the lens is in the center, right? And if you look at the lens, it is like an onion. If you look at the superficial fibers, it actually goes and finally joins, or it is a part of the posterior plate too. Okay, let's keep this in mind. But whenever we think about or we start, okay, doing a hard cataract, before we chop, we say, okay, I have to go very deep. I have to do a very deep chop and then do it. But actually, you're trying to, when we do a deep chop, you're trying to separate or, divide the hardest part of the nucleus, which becomes very challenging, especially in these brown or the black cataracts. But instead of doing the deep chops, actually, what I personally do is I do more of a superficial chop. So what I do here is if you separate the superficial fibers, which will be hard enough in a brown or a black cataract, that if you separate, that will go around and it will open even the posterior plate too. So this makes it so much more easier to separate the posterior plate than going through the hardest part of the nucleus. So the same thing. So by doing this, what happens is we insert less stress on the zonules because you don't need that much force to separate these part of the nucleus. It's not as hard as the center, and also you really isolate and you can easily separate your posterior plate. Now, the other trick in chopping in hard cataracts is do not do long chops. When you do long chops, you have a tendency for the lens to tilt. And it's something like tearing a piece of paper. You have to hold closer. You have much more control than holding a little apart and then trying to tear it. It becomes a little more challenging. Always keep the dialer just in front of the tip and then pull it along towards the tip, and then you'll achieve a good crack. And once you've done your initial stroke, you need to go and separate the different levels of the lens so that you easily separate even the posterior pole too. So if you look at this now, after the first stroke, then I go deeper, deeper, and separate. This is how you have to release and make sure that even the posterior plate also is separate. Now let's look at how this. Now you can see this is a very hard cataract. I've held it superficially just in front of the tip. I make a stroke towards the tip, and then you can see the central hard nucleus being isolated from it. So you can see it. I hope you can see this area. This is the central hard plate. And this is just a superficial chop. Every cataract becomes super easy. Doesn't matter how hard the lens is. Now see, here is one more case. And we can easily replicate in every case. So again, I clear off the superficial cortex. And once I've done that, I hold, make sure you, impale the nucleus into the superficial fibers just in front towards the tip and then sideways. And then again, you release, go a little deeper, release deeper. So that way you can easily separate even the nuclear plate. Let me show So once you've separated, anyway, I think the rest of the pieces, one of the trick in hard cataracts is you need to make as small pieces as possible so that it's much, the emulsification, it looks like NS2, but actually it's NS4 grade cataract. That is the ease at which it's able to emulsify only because, I made a smaller pieces of the phaco tip. Now, if at all, you're finding this particular technique very challenging, you can always use a Miloop. It becomes, if you master this using this particular instrument, it becomes really easy in, separating the thick leathery posterior plate. And then what you can do is, so basically what you do is once you insert it, you have to make sure the wire is just below the capsule, expand it completely, and then start rotating till you see the wire reflects from the posterior part. Once you have done that, use your dialer to steady the lens, and then within just a second, you can complete your chop, and then you're good to go. So basically, the take-home point is, I mean, I personally do it like this. I mean, every surgeon has his own technique of handling these cases, but I always do a superficial chop and always keep the chopper just in front of the tip and move towards the tip and then separate. This will become much more easier in separating your posterior plate, and the rest of the surgery becomes so much more easier. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naren. So we'll just take some questions, and we have two more speakers to go. Dr. Ramurthy, would you have a viscoelastic of choice for these hard cataracts, whether it was Naren's or further, and how often would you say you should replenish it? Very basic question.
I have my own way, in the sense that I always paint the endothelium with a dispersive viscoelastic, usually is containing chondroitin sulfate. And then just because it's thermogenic, I don't want to activate my phaco in a pool of dispersive viscoelastic. So I put a HPMC right on top of the lens and then go ahead with the procedure. And whenever it's taking some time, I do not hesitate to replenish the viscoelastic, especially coating the endothelium constantly with a dispersive viscoelastic of a good quality is extremely important.
Kamil, can you take the next question?
Yes, ma'am. To Dr. Naren, how much of lateral separation is safe? I felt that in all your cases, your right hand was almost stable and was just using your left hand to separate the nucleus laterally. So what do you advise when you're doing a hard cataract?
So the whole point is, one of the things is, it's not just lateral separation, it's also your phaco probe should go up and the dialer goes slightly down. So it's a combination of not just lateral separation, and always when we divide these kind of cataracts, one of the things which I tell all my students or fellows under me is, we have a tendency when we're trying to chop, our tendency is when we divide, we push the dialer down. That's when we break the zonules. That is something that we shouldn't. We should always imagine that when we're doing, you have to think that you're trying to rotate the lens. So that way it's, it is within the bag and it doesn't damage the zonules too much.
Dr. Anurag, you're there, no? Dr. Anurag?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. Good evening.
I felt I think we should have not spared you so much as we did this time. Some of these very hard cataracts, there are very multiple small pieces which go and hide behind the iris. So when you're doing these cataracts, how do you ensure that you prevent this occurrence? And if it has, how do you ensure that these places are taken care of?
No, I play around with my parameters a bit when I handle hard cataracts in particular, because the one thing that we have to remember is chopping is the first step in phacoemulsification, and we have a pool of viscoelastic to cover and protect the endothelium, and we are going very deep in our maneuver. So what I do is I don't depend on the shelving movement of the nozzle completely. I do add on a bit of longitudinal to it. So I keep my IP switched on, and the IP is full blown. It is 90% vacuum, 10, 20 pulses per second for a hard cataract, as leathery as Naren showed us. And then the ratio between longitudinal and torsional is around 1:1. So the moment it reaches 90% of preset vacuum, the longitudinal phaco starts operating. That enables me to dig deep and go into that sweet spot of the nucleus where it can be held and then can be separated. And the other thing I always do is, once I achieve crack till the center from the periphery, I rotate it 180 degrees, go to the other side, complete the primary chop first before attempting the secondary chop, so that at least I have two completely separate heminuclei. Just like Naren showed, some of these cases, there is a very central and extremely hard, unchoppable portion. I tend not to have it in my cases, because once that very hard endonucleus separates from the rest of the nucleus, what you don't get to see is the cleavage plane and how deep it has extended up to the posterior plane. So once that small discoid is elevated, you separate it and you consume it, you find that it's a flower petal pattern of crack with a center attached still. And if you find that, you have to find some way of going underneath the nucleus a bit, push in some viscoelastic, catch that portion so that the whole pies are properly separated from one another. Then it becomes very difficult for you to dislodge them from the gap and consume it. The idea to prevent this cheese wiring and the pieces getting lost underneath the iris or even underneath the thick arcus of the cornea is just to make sure that the pieces are large. And when you consume it, your flow rate should be enough to ensure good followability, so that the whole piece gets attached to the phaco needle and gets phacoed and consumed as a whole, and small pieces do not fly off. There, I would advise not to use the chopper too much, because people have a tendency to feed the nucleus into the phaco needle. Not to do that much, and rely on your followability, rely on your fluidics and dynamics more, so that these pieces don't fly around.